Okay, we'll start with the introductions. We have two speakers on this talk. We'll go with ladies first. Dr. Cheryl White is a history professor at Louisiana State University at Shreveport, holding the endowed Hubert Humphreys Professorship. She serves on the board of the Shroud of Turin Education and Research Association, STERA, and has published research from the Vatican Secret Archives on the Shroud's history. Dr. White was the historical consultant for the Shroud exhibit at the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., and lectures for the Smithsonian Institution. She has presented at World Youth Day, the National Eucharistic Congress, and appears in History Channel programs and an EWTN Shroud documentary. Father Peter Mangum is the pastor of Jesus the Good Shepherd Church in Monroe, Louisiana, and co-host of the podcast, Who is the Man of the Shroud? His research in the Vatican Secret Archives is published internationally, and he collaborates with the Center for International Study of the Shroud in Turin. He curates the Richard Arroyo Collection with Dr. White and speaks at major institutions like the Smithsonian and Museum of the Bible. He serves as the Episcopal delegate for the cause of canonization for the Shreveport martyrs and appears in the Five Priests and a EWTN Shroud documentary that was aired during Easter season and is available on the EWTN site. Dr. White and Father Mangum. Still working?
No, still on, that's fine.
Is the clicker working?
Let's see. I understand from one of the gentlemen here who's working tech that they're going to take all the clickers and throw them in the river. So I have that on good authority. Tonight I want to invite you into a story where we have art, faith, and politics that converges in a very unique way in history. Involving the very artifact, of course, that all of us are here to explore and discuss together over these few days. Very briefly, what I hope to do is to introduce you to a few of the items from the Arroyo Collection that we have on display here on the exhibit that's 2 floors down from here. One of the largest collections in the world of Shroud-related artworks and artifacts, of which Father Peter and I are privileged to be the custodians and curators. Most of this artwork captures moments in the Shroud's documented history. And I want to be really focused on the idea of documented history. And this is also, of course, going to be a bit of a segue to Father Peter's comments that he'll be making when I finish here. But the timeline that I want to begin with shows you some of the major points in the history sort of the Savoy family ownership of the Shroud. Just to point out a few historical markers, many of you are familiar with these, but I'm going to mention them briefly, that in 1453, of course, the House of Savoy acquires the Shroud. And then in 1506, not too long after that, is when Pope Julius II created the Feast of the Holy Shroud on May 4th at the request of the House of Savoy. 1532, of course, the Shroud is in Chambéry, in the Savoy family estate when that fire broke out, resulting in what, of course, are many of the characteristic, visual characteristics we have of the Shroud. And then 1578, obviously, it moves to Turin, Italy, and it is there today, has not left. The first public ostensions really begin in earnest in Turin that year, 1578. And by ostension, I mean a showing. Ostentatious, right? The word is ostension. We get that question a lot. What do you mean when you say ostension? It's a public showing. Those begin in earnest in 1578 and continue throughout the time that it belongs to the House of Savoy. Then in 1694, I'm going to touch on this briefly, the Savoy family makes a magnificent statement with the construction of a chapel that unites the royal palace and the cathedral there in Turin for the display of this relic that they own. And then, of course, 1983 ends the Savoy family ownership because it becomes the property of the living Pope, who today happens to be Pope Leo XIV. The oldest known painted depiction of the shroud in the years of the Savoy rule is a 1516 copy that was commissioned by the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I. The emperor commissioned a copy, it's called the Lear Shroud. He also commissioned copies of the copy, okay? Smaller devotional copies that could be shared as gifts to the Habsburg family. Gifts that could be made to religious institutions, religious houses, other ecclesiastical figures. And this 1516, smaller devotional copies even, are important because not only is it the oldest artwork that we have of the shroud in Savoy dominions, but it predates the 1532 fire. So the scorch marks and the patches are not there, but the L-shaped burn holes are there. Now what's interesting to me is this artist accurately captured the varying density of the body image. I think some of you can even see that. There are 3 known surviving devotional copies in existence, and one of them is in the Arroyo Collection. I'm very privileged to have that. The House of Savoy is crucial because they played a central role in conserving, but also in documenting the history of the shroud from the moment it came into their possession in 1453. Every single major event in the political, personal, or ecclesiastical life of the House of Savoy were accompanied by artwork commissions, leaving not only an invaluable artistic legacy, which would have been enough, by the way, but it allows historians to trace the shroud's physical and devotional history in a way that really is unusually precise. When you think about the shroud and how many gaps we have in the history, this period of 530 years is well documented. It provides the first unbroken line of provenance. It's the efforts of the Savoy family that secures the provenance of this linen and makes it possible for scientific inquiry, if that makes sense. In other words, because we can document where this shroud was for 530 years, because of their care and conservation, it makes the scientific inquiry that comes about in the 20th century possible. The Savoy family is believed to have commissioned dozens of original artworks by noted artists, and I'm going to mention a few of those. The Testa family of engravers in Turin, a noted Florentine Renaissance master by the name of Antonio Tempesta, who also worked under the patronage of the Medici family, worked for the Savoy family, and later the noted engraver Martin Engelbrecht. A key turning point came, obviously, in 1578. St. Charles Borromeo, Archbishop of Milan, vowed to walk to Chambéry to venerate the shroud if Milan was spared from a plague, and it was. And so Duke Emmanuel Philibert of Savoy met him halfway in Turin with the shroud, and this, of course, marks that point in history when it moves to Turin. But not only does this make it easier for Borromeo to make the journey, but it also firmly establishes Turin as a center and the shroud's new permanent home. This act of relocation was not just devotional, by the way. It transformed Turin into a sacred center. It elevated the Savoy family as protectors of a very significant relic of Christ's passion. So among the first and most prolific visual interpreters of the shroud were the Testa family, especially Giovanni Testa and later his descendants. Working in Turin, the Testas became very closely aligned with the Savoy family. Their prints circulated widely, helping to raise awareness of the shroud, but obviously also of the Savoy family ownership of it. And only a few of those have survived, including the rare 1578 that I showed you a moment ago, that rare 1578, and this mistake, which was unfinished because it was a double stamp on cloth. And it is also in the Arroyo Collection. It's on display here, so I encourage you to check those out. Another Testa engraving of St. Charles Borromeo from the Arroyo Collection. In this engraving and others by the Testas, what you see, the facial features of Christ are exaggerated, unusually so, unusually clear, often showing open eyes, a distinct beard, a very dramatic expression on the face. And this is in stark contrast, obviously, to the subtle, barely visible image that's on the shroud itself. Is this an empirical observation on the part of the artist, or is it just in this pre-photographic period, the fact that the artist was capturing the devotional concept of the cloth? Father Peter's going to speak a little bit more about that. These artworks remind us all, I think all of us are here to do the same thing, but they remind us all of something very important, that the shroud was not always the object of scientific study. It was not always an object of forensic interest. Clearly, this is not a forensic depiction of the man of the shroud. Several engravings from the 16th and 17th centuries depict the shroud with arms open or arms only partially crossed. Sometimes the legs are open, which differs, of course, from the actual shroud. In some of the test engravings, such as this one, you can see there is very little attempt to capture a forensic copy of it. These variations might be an intentional choice to align the shroud, these artworks, with other known devotional artworks in the Catholic world, or it simply represents the pre-photographic era, the pre-scientific era, when no one looked at this as an object to be scientifically studied, but is something to contemplate. It was something to contemplate. So there's the presence of open eyes, very detailed depictions of the wounds. These unusual features help us to understand how the shroud functioned before we lived, of course, in this very visual culture. One of the most important artists involved in the shroud's iconography, and I'm sorry that's a little bit difficult to see, but it's because the artist chose to engrave it in solid sterling silver. This is a work by Antonio Tempesta, a renowned Florentine painter. I mentioned to you, he worked under the commission of the Medici as well. This engraving of 1613, also part of the Arroyo Collection, commemorates an ostension of the shroud in Turin on the Feast of the Assumption in 1613. You see the shroud being held aloft by bishops, but what's more important is for the Savoy family, you see this massive crowd. You also see the cityscape of Turin rising in the background. And of course, Duke Charles Emmanuel I and his family are very closely intertwined in this engraving. They're all intermingled with very prominently in the scene, by the way. So they're integrating their political authority with also this religious spectacle. Speaking of religious spectacle, also here, in 1694, the crown jewel of Savoy patronage came in the completion of the Chapel of the Holy Shroud, designed by noted architect Guarino Guarini. And the chapel is an architectural wonder. For those of you that have been there, how many of you have been there? Okay, so you know this. If you've been there, you know that it physically unites the cathedral and the royal palace. It is a sacred nexus between church and state. As a matter of fact, the shroud was placed, and this reliquary you see, this is a relief of the high altar, was placed above the altar, but that was visible both from the royal palace side, or royal corridor, and from the cathedral proper. So it is this interesting sort of uniting of church and state. The story of the Shroud of Turin under the House of Savoy is more than just a narrative of relic custody, although that's important. It's a story of image making in every sense. From Giovanni Testa's early engravings to Antonio Tempesta's magnificent tableau that I showed you in sterling silver, to the soaring dome of the Guarini Chapel, the shroud became a canvas that the Savoy family sort of imprinted themselves on, in a way, projecting their claims, but also, and this is sort of the introduction for Father Peter, it also did something spectacular in that it promoted the mystery of Christ's suffering visually to the faithful in a way that our modern minds cannot even begin to comprehend. So I want us to go back and become a medieval pilgrim. Can we do that? Become a medieval pilgrim. Father Peter, swallow your coffee, your water, I'm sorry. I hope it's water. Is it water?
So thank you very much. Yes, indeed, that was a nice segue to what I have to offer. In fact, you could kind of call my talk today, the Shroud of Turin, as the pre-photographic mirror of the Gospels. we always hear about the mirror of the Gospels, and we know what we talk about nowadays, but it's all based on what we have seen, the photography and all the scientific inquiry. But gazing upon the Shroud of Turin today, any observer has that benefit of photographic revelation and scientific inquiry. To call the linen a mirror of the Gospels appeals to a very highly visual, those visual aspects of the wound details that were only made known in the past 127 years. Although the present age is so accustomed to that instantly recognizable photographic negative image of Secunda Pia's 1898 image, it is very interesting to consider how the Shroud of Turin was a true mirror of the Gospels long before Pia's dark room revelation. It is certain that for centuries, the shroud was already afforded the ownership through the House of Savoy, even though its full visual complexity was not yet accessible. The shroud nevertheless functioned as this tactile and theological mirror of the Passion narratives. Therefore, during most of its documented history, the shroud was not something forensic, but formative, offering the faithful an image that resonated with liturgical, affective, and scriptural traditions in a time way before the visual culture of the 20th century and beyond. Even without the aid of photographic enhancement, pilgrims, clergy and lay people, very easily identified key correspondences between the markings on the cloth and the Passion of Christ as recorded in sacred scripture. Observers discerned clearly, as we can today, but certainly back then, scourge marks on the back and shoulder, the large blood stain at the side, wounds at the feet and wrist, and blood on the head. Obviously, each one of these paralleling gospel passages. These visible signs offered a physical and meditative entry point into the Passion, rendering the invisible sufferings of Christ tangibly present. The burial pose, arms crossed over the torso, and imprints of both the front and back of the figure also very much aligned with the descriptions of Jewish burial practices in John 19, Mark 15. All of this lending credibility, again, pre-photographic era, to the cloth's claimed origin. For an audience who understood symbolic forms far more than the modern mind, the linen itself, this long, narrow sheet, matched gospel terminology and structure, reinforcing its authenticity as a burial cloth. The shroud thus, centuries ago, functioned as a gospel in image, especially meaningful to a largely illiterate medieval and early modern population. So its visual power was not in any way diminished by not having photographic access. Rather, its ambiguity invited contemplation. The shroud became part of the church's liturgical life, particularly within the Savoy domains. Public ostensions occurred during major feast days like Corpus Christi or throughout Holy Week with gospel readings all about the Passion narratives. The combination of the image and liturgy created a space where the shroud acted, as I will call it, a nonverbal homily, an image through which the word could be encountered. In a largely illiterate society, the visual catechesis paralleled, think about it, the functions of medieval stained glass and the mystery plays, transmitting the gospel through the eye and not through text. The church's use of the shroud in processions and in times of crisis, plague, famine, war, further emphasized its role as a source of spiritual consolation. It became, in effect, a pictorial gospel, offering the faithful a way to contemplate Christ crucified in the absence of Scripture or sacrament. And it's the House of Savoy. The House of Savoy not only preserved the shroud as a sacred relic, but also integrated it in moments of public religious life, especially during the disasters, plagues, political upheaval. These displays turned the shroud into a theological anchor and a communal act of intercession. It also made the shroud a personal mirror of the times, what was going on at the time. So let me give you a couple of examples. One of the earliest such moments was in 1506, when Pope Julius II formally approved public veneration of the shroud and allowed for this special feast day to be held on May the 4th, the day after the feast day of the finding of the cross. That feast day commemorating the discovery of the true cross by St. Helena in Jerusalem, 326. This date, May the 4th, intentionally links the shroud to the Passion. And the church, it links to the church's broader understanding of relics and redemption. In 1578, as we all already know, the shroud was transferred from Chambéry to Turin to accommodate St. Charles Borromeo, that vow that he had made in thanksgiving for the end of the plague. This is when the Savoy family seized the opportunity to make Turin its permanent home, underscoring this emerging status as both a religious and political center. This act symbolized the link between civic crisis and personal penitence and the visible wounds of Christ seen on the shroud. The shroud was again publicly displayed during the plague of 1630, which devastated northern Italy, including the Savoy territory. Duke Amadeus I, and not some religious leader, the Duke ordered an ostension of the shroud in order to invoke divine protection and mercy. In an age when pandemics were understood in religious terms as either divine punishment or as trials permitted for our sanctification, the shroud itself functioned as a prayer and consolation. It mirrored Christ's wounds, not only as historical facts, but as present wounds shared with the whole suffering body of the faithful. During the War of Spanish Succession, 1701-1714, which brought disastrous famine to the people of Piedmont, the shroud was again carried in solemn procession through the streets of Turin in 1706, just before that decisive battle of Turin. Victor Amadeus II joined it to the prayers for the city's protection. And the subsequent victory was attributed by many to the intercession invoked through the shroud. In 1849, during the revolutionary upheavals across Europe, including the Kingdom of Sardinia under the Savoy rule at the time, the shroud was publicly displayed yet again in Turin, emphasizing the call for peace, unity, religious reaffirmation amidst nationalist unrest. Each of these displays functioned not only as some pious gesture, but as public theology, reasserting Christ's suffering and sovereignty in the midst of historical uncertainty. These ostensions aligned with the theology of devotio moderna and Catholic spirituality of the time, both of which emphasized affective identification with the suffering of Christ. In other words, the shroud is not some mere museum piece. It is a visual prompt for compassion and internal conversion, And in a world frequented by death and war and disease, the shroud offers this visual Christology. God crucified, not in theory, but in bleeding, burial, human likeness. The faintness of that image may have actually enhanced its devotional efficacy. Why? Well, it demanded more than eyesight. It invited the faithful to bring the gospel narrative into focus through memory and prayer and repentance. Unlike icons with all of their colors and form, the shroud's very ambiguity reinforced mystery. The faithful were not told what to see, they were called to recognize. The shroud's importance as a mirror of the Gospels, therefore, also lies in its contribution to affective spirituality, which emphasized personal identification with Christ's sufferings. So now, from the 13th century onwards, works like Meditations on the Life of Christ and The Imitation of Christ cultivated an inner piety that focused on the wounds of Christ and his passion. We see that the shroud aligned perfectly with this movement, inviting viewers not to explain, but to weep, to emphasize, to empathize, to adore. For the pre-photographic pilgrim, the shroud left space for contemplation, precisely because it was mysterious. Viewers filled in what was not clear with the imagination shaped by the Gospels and Passion narratives. The bloodstains in particular were interpreted not scientifically, but sacramentally as the price of redemption and the visible outpouring of divine love. During the time before there was formal scientific inquiry in the 20th century, the theological resonance was remarkably profound. It was often referred to, even implicitly, as the fifth gospel, a phrase later popularized by Pope St. John Paul II. Many call it the first gospel, as it predates the other four gospels. Its mystery was not seen as a problem to be solved, but as a grace to be received. And the unknown method, again, all before the first photograph, the unknown method of image formation was itself part of this spiritual authority. Like the incarnation and resurrection, the shroud pointed to a divine reality far greater than any human comprehension. As early as the 16th century, references likening the shroud to Veronica's veil situated it within this larger tradition of akeriopotus, those images not made with human hands. So, the Savoy family displays were not only royal acts of piety, but liturgical events that framed the shroud as a kind of liturgy in cloth, where the image was not just a representation as with an icon, but as a more profound manifestation of mystery. So, in this light, the shroud was both an icon and a relic. It bore material testimony to the immaterial reality of Christ's passion. Long before there was photographic unveiling, the Shroud of Turin had been a living gospel for the eyes and hearts of the faithful. Through the House of Savoy's stewardship, especially in the times of plague and war and social upheavals, the shroud was exhibited as a sign of divine solidarity with human suffering. It mirrored the Gospels not only in image, but just as importantly, in purpose, calling people, the shroud itself, calling people to conversion, compassion, and hope. In times when words faltered and institutions crumbled, the linen cloth with Christ's silent image stood as a steadfast sermon. The Word made flesh, crucified and buried, yet never absent from the wounds of the world. Let's fast forward right now. Easter Vigil 2020. In his own way, Archbishop Nosiglia of Turin, now emeritus, naturally picked up on this devotional significance of the shroud before 1898 by offering, as many of you I'm sure recall, an international live stream ostension for COVID suffering, so that those suffering could gaze upon their own suffering mirrored back to them by the suffering of the risen Christ. And I am absolutely sure the House of Savoy would have been quite pleased with this modern example of what they themselves had done when custodians and stewards of the shroud. Now time for your questions or observations. Myra's hand was up first, then Russ.
So it seems like the Catholic Church has gotten more shy about how they promote the shroud. It seems like the Catholic Church has gotten more shy about how they promote the shroud. It seems like they just kind of tuck it away and don't talk about it a whole lot compared to what they did before, the public, as much public display, and they were using it to convey to people that it was the hope of Christ resurrected. But the Catholic Church today just is more quiet about it. So you just comment about that. Maybe we'll see a heyday again.
I certainly hope we see a heyday again. There's no doubt about it. And in fact, there were many people petitioning Pope Francis for a STURP 2. You know, the Shroud of Turin Research Project of 1978. Well, let's have it again.
Probably some of the people in this room would have wanted that.
Yeah, there were people right here, so which we have no problems with. And wouldn't it be interesting if the first American owner of the shroud, Pope Leo XIV, he's the owner as an individual. Remember, the Catholic Church does not own it. It was willed by Umberto II in 1983 upon his death when he was exiled in Portugal to the living pope, and then passed on to each subsequent pope. So we're from Louisiana, and I think everyone is trying to claim some type of association with Pope Leo XIV, and as some of you may or may not know, he does have family in New Orleans. And very interestingly enough, they are doing all that they possibly can to find his lineage. And it's very interesting that this one person born and raised in Turin, Italy, marries this young woman with the last name Savoya, who comes to New Orleans by means of French Canada. But anyways,
We want to make a connection.
wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great if the shroud is owned by someone who has Savoy blood? Anyhow, but really to get back to your question, I really hope that someone in the Vatican, maybe even the Pope himself, with a very mathematical, analytical mind, would be very willing to open up further studies, investigation. I think we're all sensing it worldwide that there's more and more and more interest in the shroud. And so how great it would be if the Catholic Church was able to continue to join its voices with so many others.
Can I say one more thing? The second I heard that Pope Leo was named, first thing I did is I Googled his name with the shroud, and there was nothing. There was nothing. So is that good news or bad news?
It's no news.
Mark Antonacci is saying that's not true.
I Googled, there was nothing.
Well, Google.
Chevalier says that there was a secret commission under Pope Leo XIII, and they found that it was non-sustainer, and it wasn't true at all. He published this 3 different times, and finally they clamped down on him. That was the last time you heard from Chevalier. So Pope Leo XIII quieted him down. It was too little too late, but...
No, I was talking about the new Pope.
He's talking about Leo XIV.
Right, so,
Yeah, the current Leo.
so Russ.
Oh, well, I was just gonna ask a question about that last image you had up on the screen with the seven
The
swords.
Seven Sorrows.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't
Oh,
that
okay.
beautiful?
Okay, I was
Yeah.
just curious what
That's the
that.
Seven Sorrows of Mary, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't understand what it was.
So, Russ? Here and then in the back row. And then over here.
Father Rinaldi told me, he told the king to will it to the Pope, the shroud.
Wonderful.
Oh, you're looking at me like.
Love it.
I've never heard that.
Well, he
Father
told me
who?
that personally.
Father Rinaldi.
That
Yeah.
he did, Father Rinaldi.
My
Yeah.
goodness.
That's.
Well, how
that's the
providential was
Pope
that?
Pardon me?
How providential was that then?
Thank you for sharing that.
It's kind of an interesting bit of trivia.
Yeah, sure.
Very nice. Thank you. Then here and then here.
Over here.
Back row. Cheryl?
I did note carefully that the 1516 painted replica, was it Albert Dürer who did that?
Well, okay, that's a great question.
But I want to talk about the L holes because it's very useful that you just
Yes,
passed it.
no, yeah.
It's very important he included them.
Exactly.
But he
So-
did not put in the rectangular gaps. And I would think that if they existed then, he probably would have included them. The two
rectangular
gaps at the
gaps. Oh,
corners.
Yeah, well, okay, so remember that what you're looking at here is not the Lear Shroud copy that was probably made, perhaps, I'm looking, Pam Moon's in here, so I'm gonna, Lucas Cranach may have made the full-size copy. When the emperor commissioned these smaller devotional copies, the artist may have been
Left it out.
Dürer, because there are some differences between the devotional copies and the full-size.
And I do note they don't put the L holes in any of the other illustrations, and they do put in loincloths.
Right.
So that's
Well,
kind of
sure,
interesting,
yes.
yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So this gentleman had his hand next, and someone on this side.
Come on, Joe, get those steps in.
I'd just like to comment about, you mentioned about the iconoclast. One of the things that I meet in my discussions with neighbors and workers and friends, a lot of people in our area, I live amongst the Amish, and they're very old school, and they're very concerned about the shroud being an idol. And a lot of people, we have Catholic friends too, but there are a lot of people in our area that are somewhat antagonistic against Catholics, and they look at the shroud as though that's some idol. And I think one of the things that we need to promote is the fact that it is not to be used as a point of worship, but as a point of evidence. I feel
very
that's
nice.
important.
Right. Well, an idol is something made by human hands, and we don't believe that this was made by human hands, that there was somehow some
Right.
divine, well, we all know about that. But
It's not a
so,
great
yes, I
image.
mean, and also in the Catholic understanding of things, there's a difference between worship and veneration. I mean, worship is for God and God alone, not for the saints, not even for Mary. We don't worship Mary. We certainly don't worship idols. We don't worship statues, but I get it. I've seen how many people kneeling down, hugging statues, putting candles there, kissing the statues, whatever it may be. So I can get it for an untrained eye that they would somehow think that we're worshiping this plaster statue that's been painted. And so therefore, the leap to the shroud as well. So please understand, and maybe we need to make that point a little more evident, that in no way, shape, or form were the Savoy family or all the way up to us today, worshiping. We look, we venerate, we call to mind what our Savior did for us, and call upon his intercession.
Father Mangum, you said a quote earlier
Yes.
that was just absolutely amazing. It was not a problem to be solved, but a grace to be received.
Right.
That was beautiful.
Well, thank you. I mean, exactly, because at that time, the medieval pilgrim would have approached the shroud on his or her knees, looked up there, and believed, because some religious authority said that's the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, and that they would have totally believed, and they were going not trying to solve something, but because they wanted to receive grace.
Yeah.
Yes, please. Just shout it out.
So maybe in response to this fellow's question, the bronze serpent that God commanded Moses to create was actually destroyed in the book of Kings because people tended to worship it. However, with the Shroud of Turin, Saints Charles Borromeo and Saint Francis de Sales,
Right.
because of the blood in the shroud, they believed it was worthy of latria. It was only
Yes.
to God and not dulia like due to the saints. Because of this idea of the hypostatic union that the divinity of Christ remained in his body, in the corpse while it was in the tomb, that even though his human soul and human body were separated in death, his divinity remained united to both those things, even though they were separated amongst themselves. Kind of a...
That's a fascinating perspective.
No.
No, that's really
But
interesting.
that's what those two saints...
Well, and you mentioned St. Francis de Sales is the reason I went back to this particular slide, because he's in there somewhere. I can't point him out to you, but he's on that dais up there holding the shroud.
In that particular ostentation, he actually wept.
He did, and he sweat on the cloth.
Onto
Yes.
the cloth near the feet of our Lord.
Yes.
And the head of that criticized him for it.
Yes. A bishop criticized him.
And he thought about responding, but he didn't. But he wrote to St. John Chantal, who he worked
Yes.
with, saying that
John-
he didn't think that the Lord was too sensitive about him shedding tears, because he had joined our human nature to his own.
Right.
And he didn't think he could be too sensitive
Right.
to his tears.
Right. Right. Beautiful story about that. Yes.
Absolutely.
We have one back. Well, okay.
Can I take that? Are you aware that Bishop Charles Borromeo said Mass on the shroud when it arrived in Turin in 1578?
Well, I know that there was a mass said in its presence. I did not know that it was used as some sort of an altar
I am
cloth.
told he used it as an altar cloth.
Okay.
And that would actually be consistent with Catholic tradition of having that linen that is
Right.
on...
Corporal.
Well, I mean, the entire,
the entire,
linen
yeah.
altar cloth that would cover the entirety of the altar, even kind of draped down on either side. And in fact, some people say that those holes, the L-shaped holes, those poker chip holes, might have been created by someone using a thurible, the incense. I mean, I'm just saying what some people have said, but I'm not aware specifically that St. Charles Borromeo used that as an altar cloth, but that he had it in his presence, certainly.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes.
We have about 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Oh, all right. Yes, please.
If you look at the standard of art here, the artists are clearly very gifted
Yes.
until they start drawing the shroud.
Yes. Yes.
So does your argument fuel the fact that a medieval forger could have made the whole thing from scratch?
Oh, thank you, Pam. Thank you for that. Yeah, that someone as gifted as Giovanni Testa or Antonio Tempesta couldn't get this right. We're supposed to think some random medieval forger got it so precise. That's an excellent point. I'm stealing that, by the way. I'll give you credit, but I'm totally stealing that.
How about our final question?
Yes.
Just belt it out, please.
I've been so impressed by what you've shown us, and this is,
Check out the artworks.
Yes. And my question is, were these the kinds of artwork that were then laid on the shroud, and so that they?
Yes. Many of them. Many of them will be second-class relics. Yes, because many of these were gifts. So the Savoy family would take, for instance, a copy of this. Remember that Giovanni Testa had to make the plate and then stamp the parchment. So that parchment would then be touched to the shroud and given as a gift. Yes.
And so in your collection, you know that some of those are second-class relics?
We must assume that they are. Yeah.
But there are definitely second-class relics downstairs, and you'll see them very clearly as gifts given. It was a 1931
Ostension.
ostension on the occasion of a royal wedding. So if you own the shroud and you have all these kings and queens and princes and other people showing up to the royal wedding, you know, they gave some of these items to them as mementos.
Right.
And also to monasteries as objects of devotion. Again, not worship, but devotion.
Mm-hmm.
Although I really liked what you said earlier.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please go downstairs.
Please check out the artworks.